The silent generation, also known as the traditionalist generation, is the Western demographic cohort following the greatest generation and preceding the baby boomers. The generation is generally defined as people born from 1928 to 1945. By this definition and U.S. Census data, there were 23 million silents in the United States as of 2019. In the United States, the Great Depression of the 1930s and World War II in the early to mid-1940s caused people to have fewer children, and as a result, the generation is comparatively small. It includes most of those who fought during the Korean War. Upon coming of age in the post-war era, silents were sometimes characterized as trending towards conformity and traditionalism, as well as comprising the silent majority. However, they have also been noted as forming the leadership of the civil rights movement and the 1960s counterculture, and creating the rock and roll music of the 1950s and 1960s. In the United Kingdom, the silent generation was also born during a period of relatively low birth rates for similar reasons to the United States and was quite traditional upon coming of age. They lived through times of prosperity as young adults, economic upheaval in middle age, and relative comfort in later life. The 60ers is a similar age group in the Soviet Union, whose upbringings were also heavily influenced by the troubles of the mid-20th century. The term "the builders" has been used to describe a similar cohort in Australia. Most people of the silent generation are the parents of Generation X and younger baby boomers. Their own parents most commonly belong to either the greatest generation or the lost generation, baby boomers. The generation is often defined as people born from 1946 to 1964 during the mid-20th century baby boom. The dates, the demographic context, and the cultural identifiers may vary by country. Most baby boomers are children of either the greatest generation or the silent generation, and are often parents of Gen Xers and millennials. In the West, boomers' childhoods in the 1950s and 1960s had significant reforms in education, both as part of the ideological confrontation that was the Cold War and as a continuation of the interwar period. Theirs was a time of economic prosperity and rapid technological progress. In the 1960s and 1970s, as this relatively large number of young people entered their teens and young adulthood, the oldest turned 18 in 1964. They, and those around them, created a very specific rhetoric around their cohort, and the social movements brought about by their size in numbers, such as the counterculture of the 1960s, and its backlash. In many countries, this period was one of deep political instability due to the post-war youth bulge. In China, boomers lived through the Cultural Revolution and were subject to the one-child policy as adults. These social changes and rhetoric had an important impact in the perceptions of the boomers, as well as society's increasingly common tendency to define the world in terms of generations, which was a relatively new phenomenon. This group reached puberty and maximum height earlier than previous generations. In Europe and North America, many boomers came of age in a time of increasing affluence and widespread government subsidies in post-war housing and education, and grew up genuinely expecting the world to improve with time. Those with higher standards of living and educational levels were often the most demanding of betterment. In the early 21st century, baby boomers in some developed countries are the single biggest cohort in their societies due to subreplacement fertility and population aging. In the United States, they are the second most numerous age demographic after millennials. Generation A is a term often used to refer to individuals who were born between the mid-1990s and early 2010s. This generation is also known as Generation Z or the I generation. While there is some debate about the exact years that define Generation A, it generally encompasses those who grew up during the rapid rise of technology and the internet. Members of Generation A are often characterized as being tech-savvy and digitally connected from an early age. They have never known a world without smartphones, social media, and on-demand access to information. This constant exposure to technology has shaped many aspects of their lives, including their communication style, social interactions, and even their career aspirations. One of the defining features of Generation A is their status as digital natives. They are comfortable using technology and tend to adapt quickly to new advancements, Growing up in the digital age has also given them a unique perspective on issues such as privacy, cybersecurity, and online identity. Social media plays a significant role in the lives of Generation A. Platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok are an integral part of their social interactions and self-expression. This generation is known for curating their online presence carefully and engaging in online activism, using social media as a platform for social change. Generation A is also known for its diversity and inclusiveness. They value and celebrate individuality and are often more open-minded and accepting of different identities, cultures, and perspectives. They tend to be progressive in their views on issues such as gender equality, LGBTQ+ rights, and racial justice. In terms of education and career, Generation A is often seen as a generation of entrepreneurs. They are resourceful and enjoy the freedom of freelancing and digital nomadism. Many members of this generation also prioritize work-life balance and place a strong emphasis on personal fulfillment and purpose in their careers. Overall, Generation A represents a generation that has grown up in a rapidly changing world. Their lives have been deeply influenced by technology, which has shaped their behaviors, aspirations, and outlook on the world. Generation X, a term typically used to describe the generation of Americans born between 1965 and 1980, although some sources use slightly different ranges. It has sometimes been called the middle child generation, as it follows the well-known baby boomer generation and precedes the millennial generation, Generation Y, meaning those born between 1981–96. Generation X also has been called the baby bust generation because its members were born when the high birth rates of the baby boomer decades declined, attributed in part to the introduction of the birth control pill, which first went on the market in the early 1960s. It has fewer members than the generations that precede it, Gen Y and Gen Z, meaning those born between 1997 and the early 2010s. This is one of the reasons that Generation X is considered to be forgotten or overlooked when generations are discussed. As compared with previous generations, members of Generation X are more ethnically diverse, with some one-third of Gen Xers identifying as non-white, are somewhat less likely to be involved in organized religion, and tend to be more liberal on social issues, such as same-sex marriage. However, this open-mindedness did not necessarily translate into a more traditionally liberal political identification. A 2022 Gallup poll showed that 27% of Gen Xers identified as Democrats, while 30% identified as Republicans. More Gen Xers, 44%, chose to identify as independent, which was a higher percentage than in previous generations.